Welcome students to lesson 20 of the Urban World topic. In this lesson we are going to be concluding our understanding of the environment in HIC cities. In the previous lesson I showed you how changes in Bristol have caused threats to its natural environment and to people's health, both within Bristol and around the world. In this lesson I'm going to show you what Bristol has done and what it can do in the future to reduce the environmental impacts of its success. Please take a moment to write the date, title and learning objective, and have a pen and paper ready to learn. Time to review prior learning. Write 1 to 10, answer the questions from memory, and then mark your answers. Game time. Number 1. A derelict area or place is one that is run down and or abandoned. 2. In Bristol, urban sprawl has happened due to population growth and inner city decline in the 20th century. 3. Bristol's volume of waste had grown to about 500,000 tonnes per year in 2012. 4. About 200 people die per year in Bristol from air pollution due to vehicles. 5. A problem with inner city decline is the rise in crime and unemployment, which reduces investment by businesses. 6. Harry Stoke is an example of a village in the rural-urban fringe of Bristol. 7. A Brownfield site is one that is derelict and within a city. 8. Bristol's green belt is a ring of natural ecosystems that restrict urban growth. 9. In 2009, a blackout in Rio left the city in darkness for more than 2 hours. 10. Squatter settlements are illegally built homes that are poorly constructed and can be demolished by the government. Give yourselves a mark out of 10. If you got 8 or more, I salute you. Well done. Any questions that you got wrong, write them down and test yourselves on them repeatedly until you've memorized them. To introduce the idea of how HIC cities reduced environmental impacts, I'm going to show you a photo and some questions. Use the photo in your own knowledge to answer the questions and then we'll discuss them. Number 1. You should have said that since the USA is a HIC and the richest country in the world, the main sectors, as in most cities, especially in HICs, are the tertiary and quaternary sectors. Services such as in office jobs, retail, shopping, tourism, and quaternary research, for example in universities. 2. What environmental challenges may face NYC, New York City? Well, you can see the boats here. They might release oil or air pollution. The cars that travel through the city might release carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide and other gases. The enormous amount of waste caused by the 15 million people that live in New York City. These may all be problems created by the success of the city. 3. How might NYC be reducing air pollution from transport? Well, you could have said it's increased public transport, for example, people using ferries to get around instead of driving. You may have said it's developed an underground service, the subway, which people use to get around instead of by taking cars. You might have said that New York is introducing a congestion charge so that drivers have to pay to enter the city, which discourages driving further. Or you may have talked about recycling. All of these points are valid and they're all things that New York City is doing or has done to reduce the environmental impact of its economy. 4. What is New York City doing to reduce urban sprawl? Look carefully at the picture. Well, you should have said that urban sprawl is caused by buildings spreading out across the landscape, such as over here in New Jersey and down here. What New York City is doing is it's building upwards, skyscrapers, both in uptown and also in downtown here in Manhattan. Skyscrapers take up much less land than smaller buildings and can hold far more people. And consequently, building skyscrapers like this reduces urban sprawl. In this lesson, we're going to be exploring the 3 principal challenges that face HIC cities, especially Bristol. We're going to be looking at waste, at air pollution, and at urban dereliction. And I'm going to show you the very clever strategies that Bristol has taken to reduce the impacts of these. So, a brownfield site is a derelict former industrial area within a city, any city, This is a typical example of a brownfield site. The industry has become abandoned because of deindustrialization. It's left lots of harmful chemicals, run-down buildings, waste has piled up, leaking stagnant water. Typical brownfield site. And the key feature of a brownfield site is that it can be built on. This can be removed and replaced. Let's go. So, how do cities solve dereliction and urban sprawl? And how has Bristol done this? Well, urban sprawl is typically reduced in two principal ways. And let's focus on Bristol in this case. One of the main reasons that Bristol's expanse increased across the landscape is because of population growth. That meant that more houses were needed, and so rural urban fringe communities such as Harry Stoke were built. However, Bristol has an asset, a key thing within the city that it could use better that would reduce urban sprawl. It has brownfield sites, many of them. Huge warehouses like this that exist in Harbourside, the very centre of the city, completely abandoned, provide a great opportunity for Bristol to construct homes for people within the centre on top of old buildings or even renewing old buildings, and therefore preventing the construction of new homes in the Greenbelt. This is exactly what has happened in the Harbourside development project. In the last 10 years, Harbourside has been renovated, so renewed, to look like this. More than 2,000 new apartments have been built in Harbourside, and that has housed people in the very centre of the city and upwards like New York City, which takes up less space. One of the key successes of this project has been in reducing urban sprawl. However, Harbourside is probably the most popular part of Bristol, especially in terms of tourism, and these apartments don't come cheap. And consequently, not all people can afford them. They're typically most available to those in the highest skilled, highest paid jobs, such as the people who work for Airbus or in the universities. Therefore, by themselves, projects like this, like the Harbourside Development Project, which took the old mill here, steel mill, and turned it into apartment blocks, is not going to solve urban sprawl by itself. However, it does reduce dereliction, because this old abandoned warehouse and factory is transformed into very attractive apartment blocks. Additionally, manufacturing sites across the centre of Bristol provide great opportunities for regeneration, making them new. Instead of demolishing buildings like was done here, you could just reuse them. That's not only cheaper, but it's faster, and it also contributes to reducing urban sprawl. This is called urban regeneration, taking old buildings and renewing them. This is an example of urban regeneration. This is Stokes Croft, which we looked at in a previous lesson. The old carriage works where trains were built and maintained in the centre of Bristol when that was an important industry are now abandoned. But a plan is afoot to turn them into this. Here is what is predicted that the carriage works will look like in the next few years, and it's currently being done right now. More than 200 apartments are going to be built within these buildings. Art centres are going to be set up that people can train in and explore their creativity. And key, because local people protested against the plans, they've become affordable homes. Originally the plan was to make these quite expensive luxury apartments because that's the most profitable for developers who construct homes. But local people demanded more affordable housing, and that's what's happened. The gates have been removed from the plans so that people can come in and out and use it as a community centre, for example, nurseries for children. And windows have been widened to add extra natural light. And finally, it provides jobs for people. The whole bottom floor is going to be shops and training centres, and above it residential for housing. These two projects and these two strategies, building on brownfield sites and urban regeneration, have both been done effectively within Bristol, and they have a profound effect on urban dereliction. They remove it. As a consequence of the Stokes Croft regeneration, it is expected that crime will fall, unemployment will rise, Businesses will invest in this brand new office space. People who are richer and more skilled will move back into the centre of the city, rather than moving out to the suburbs. So it creates employment for people. Additionally, crime is expected to fall. As businesses invest in an area, people are provided with jobs. Their incomes rise, and so their desperation and need to commit crimes falls. And so this will become safer. That's already happened in Harbourside. Now, as I said, probably the most popular tourist location in Bristol, but it wasn't so 20 years ago. House prices normally rise in cities when populations grow. However, if you increase the number of houses available and turn them into apartments like this and this, then you can reduce the speed at which house prices rise and consequently make them more affordable to people. If houses in the centre are more affordable to people, more people can live there, and so fewer people need to build and live in houses on the outskirts. Less chance of urban sprawl. And finally, if people live in the centre of a city, like Bristol, very near to their jobs where they work, they will not need to travel by car. They will cycle or walk or take public transport, and consequently air pollution is predicted to fall dramatically in Bristol over the next 20 years as these plans, such as the regeneration at Stokes Croft, come into effect. How do cities tackle air pollution? So I've introduced you to the first idea. If you reduce urban sprawl, you reduce air pollution. New York City actually has fairly low air pollution for a city of its size because so many people use public transport, largely because it's quite compact. So reducing urban sprawl reduces air pollution. However, there are other really powerful strategies. Bristol has been particularly successful in this area. Public transport is one of the most important ways to tackle air pollution. Without it, it won't happen. And Bristol has introduced this. This is a really cool project. This is called the Metrobus, and it's an example of bus rapid transit. So it's a bus that runs on separate lanes. But not only that, this bus here is running on a track that comes from a railway. This used to be a railway bridge. And it sits within a special depressed track like this that has a unique feature. On each side of the bus are special guide wheels like this that touch the sides of this track. And this means that the bus can never veer off the lane. And since there are no cars or other traffic, it consequently means that buses on the bus rapid transit system in Bristol can travel very fast, averaging 50 miles an hour. This means that bus journeys are far shorter than they would be with a normal bus service where buses travel on the same roads as cars. And consequently, as you can see here, demand for bus transport is much higher in Bristol than in other cities because journeys are much faster. That owes largely to the success of guide rail travel like this and bus rapid transit being on separate lanes. £80 million was invested in buses to be retrofitted, which means adapted like this and put into special lanes like this. But it's a very successful project, not only because of the guide rails, as you will see. Additionally, people won't always take public transport. It isn't flexible enough. It doesn't necessarily stop exactly where they want it to. Personal transport is important as well. But you don't want people to take cars. You want people to cycle, ideally. And so Bristol has built 75 miles of cycle lanes that have no cars on them throughout the city and around its outskirts. This is the Bristol Cycle Highway. Demand for cycling in Bristol has increased 60% in the last 10 years because of these cycling lanes. They are widened, they are well lit, they are very safe, and they're very smooth, so the chance of you falling off or being injured is very low. Consequently, people prefer to cycle now than in the past. And the impact of both of these strategies, if there is high demand for them, is massively reduced air pollution. But it's not only that. Bristol has done one step further, and they've introduced this. This is called an Integrated Transport System, ITS, and here's how it works. When you leave a house in the morning and you want to take a bus, you might have to walk to the bus stop. You take the bus several stops, and let's say you want to get to the train station. That bus will eventually get to the train station, you get on the train, you go to London or some other city. This is possible because of integrated transport. In the best cities, you can get on a bus right outside your house and go straight to a train station or straight to your office in the centre, and then you can take the train without any effort at all because it's right there at the bus stop. Similarly, this is a map of Bristol's cycle lanes, and these dots represent bus stops as well. And they also represent large cycle cages where you can lock up your bikes and take a bus or take a train, meaning that changing from one form of public transport to another is effortless. And it dramatically increases demand for public transport because it's so easy to get around the city using the different forms of transport. If the weather suddenly worsens and you want to take a bus and give up the bicycle, then you lock the bike up, you take the bus to the centre. London is one of the pioneers, which means leaders, of integrated transport, and the reason it's so successful is because it's so easy to go from one transport system to another. You can get what's called a Santander cycle in London, which is where you tap a card and you can unlock a bike and cycle it to a train station, lock it back up. The bike isn't yours, you've just rented it for half an hour. And then, here's the key part. You use an Oyster card in London, which is a special cash card that has money loaded onto it, and you just tap in and tap out, and you can use it for a bus or a train. And consequently, the fact that it's so easy and so cheap means that most people in London use this. Bristol is going to be introducing this next year, an Oyster transport system for its integrated transport system. And consequently, people in Bristol are expected to use public transport far more than they do now. Because you don't need to carry cash around, you don't need to worry about coins, you don't need to worry about buying a ticket online or anything like that. You can go from a bus to a train to a cycle track without any effort at all. So cost and ease are very important parts of a successful public transport system, and consequently, they are very important to reduce air pollution. Only by increasing public transport and personal transport through cycling will air pollution really fall in the city. So what is the expected benefit of this integrated transport system once it's complete in Bristol? Well, air pollution is expected to fall. Predictions are that Bristol will never again rise above the World Health Organization, WHO's limit for safe air in a city because of the rise of clean buses, which don't release harmful chemicals, and because of the rise of cycling. Additionally, because these buses travel so fast, and because these cycling lanes are so safe and wide and fast as well, and because of the reduction of urban sprawl, it's expected people will be able to get to work much more quickly. There'll be far less congestion on the roads since people are taking buses where you can fit 50 people. 50 people on a car would take far more space on the road. So people get to work much faster, they do their work much better because they're healthier as well as getting there faster. Consequently, their value they create for the company is much greater. And so they make more money for themselves, more profit for the company. More profit for companies equals more taxes for the government, which means more money to invest in the city. And finally, on a global scale, climate change is reduced by the introduction of public transport and personal transport that replaces vehicles. Carbon dioxide in cities is one of the main causes of climate change today because it's a powerful greenhouse gas that traps infrared radiation and warms up the planet's atmosphere. Bristol's efforts to introduce the bus rapid transit system Metrobus and its improvements in its cycle lanes will contribute to reducing Bristol's CO2 emissions in the next 20 years. And finally, Bristol's waste problem. With a rich, educated and growing population, Bristol's waste has expanded significantly in the last 20 years. And the government and the local people have become increasingly aware of how important it is to do something about this. So what have they done? Well, there are two types of waste. There's food waste, non-recyclable, and recyclable waste. Let me show you how Bristol deals with each of these. Food waste. Bristol introduced a very clever public awareness campaign, which educates people in the importance of reducing their waste. It also encourages people to reduce their waste like this. This is called the Fill My Face campaign, and it was online, and it was on TV, and it was on buses and in restaurants in Bristol. Here's how it works. These food caddies are specially designed by whoever owns them. And as part of this project, they encourage people to put their food waste into these bins rather than into waste bins where the food ends up in landfills. And when the food ends up in these food caddies, it is collected by Bristol's waste company, and that food is taken to a place called Avonmouth, which is a big waste-to-energy factory at the mouth of the Avon River, which is the river that goes through Bristol. And at this waste-to-energy plant, the Avonmouth waste-energy plant, this food is digested and broken down without oxygen, and when that happens, it releases methane. That methane is collected and stored. And as you know, methane is the main component of natural gas. And that natural gas can be used to fuel buses. This is Bristol's biobus, informally called Bristol's poo bus, as you can see from these photos. Sewage and food waste go together into the Avonmouth plant. Waste is collected, methane is stored and used to fuel buses. Hence the poo bus or the biobus. Not many of these have been used so far in buses. Far more have been used in people's homes to provide electricity. The gas goes to power stations, which is burned to generate electricity. 25,000 homes in Bristol are powered every year by biogas from decomposed food and human waste from sewage. As a result of this, much less methane is released into the atmosphere, and much less fuel in the form of petrol and diesel are needed for vehicles, and much less coal needs to be burned to power homes. The food waste does not go to waste. It is reused to improve the environmental quality of Bristol. It's been a great success. As a result of it, as you will see, Bristol has managed to significantly reduce the food waste every year. In fact, one awesome statistic is this. In 2015, people on average in Bristol wasted £60 a year chucking away food. That has gone down to £20 a year. Not only because they reduced the amount of waste they put in here, but also any waste they do produce gets recycled. What about other waste, not food waste? You can't turn that into energy in the same way. So how does Bristol do it? Well, this is the second part of Bristol's public awareness campaign. It was really called the Slim My Waste, Fill My Face campaign. And the Slim My Waste part works like this. This is Bristol's waste bin, the black bins. And this is waste that cannot be recycled. And a big awareness campaign was raised in schools and universities and hospitals and restaurants to reduce the amount that people chucked into these bins. So if you have waste, where do you put them if not in these bins? Well, Bristol provides people with 4 different bins. 3 of which are for recycling. The brown bin I've told you about, the food bin. But 2 others are for different types of recycling. And these are the largest bins, and this is the smallest one. Again, encouraging people to use recycling bins. The lorries that turn up at people's homes every week to collect waste have specially compartmentalized containers where the different coloured bins go into. And as you can see, the Slim My Waste, Feed My Face campaign is on them. The Bristol Waste Company is in charge of this effort. Now, when this lorry drives around the city of Bristol and collects waste from the different bins, it takes it to a waste sorting facility in Bristol, where the plastic and other recyclable materials are sorted out. The plastic is then crushed and broken down into tiny pellets. Any non-recyclable parts are taken out by people and machines, and these pellets are then sold to companies around the world where the plastic is reused to create things like trainers and plastic bottles, for example in Coke bottles. This generates an enormous amount of income for Bristol's waste company, which means it can invest further in bins and in recycling campaigns such as this, which further reduces waste. It also has this awesome effect. The plastic can then be reused since it's been sorted and shown to be recyclable. This is an art exhibition at the Arnolfini Centre in Bristol's Harbourside, which demonstrates all recycled plastic furniture. Another way that showed the people of Bristol how useful it was to recycle and reduce waste. And what has been the consequence of this? Well, I told you that almost 20% of waste 10 years ago was chucked on landfills. Much less was recycled. Well, here's what it's like today. 14.5% of food waste is decomposed and used as compost on farms. A quarter of all waste is recycled like this and reused for income. More than half of all the waste, especially the food waste, is turned into electricity. And just 8 and a bit % now go to landfill. It's dropped by 42% in the last 10 years. That is a significant achievement for a city, and it proves that through simple public awareness campaigns and correct infrastructure, such as waste energy plants and lorries, you can reduce urban waste. Time to assess learning. Question 1. What is an integrated transport system? You should have said that an integrated transport system, ITS, is when all the different types of public transport in a city are connected up, so that you can get off a bike, lock it up at a train station, get on a train. At the train station, you can get a bus right outside and get the bus very easily using a contact card like an Oyster card to your work or to your home. There are no gaps between the different forms of transport, and you can use the same form of payment method, so the Oyster card system, for example, to use any form of transport. That is integrated transport. Give me one benefit of an integrated transport system. Question 2. You should have said that an ITS scheme, integrated transport system, reduces demand for vehicles, for cars, because it makes it so cheap and easy to use public transport. This not only reduces air pollution, it also increases productivity because people get to work faster. Question 3. How can brownfield site development reduce urban sprawl? You should have said if you build on a brownfield site, such as in Harbourside, you use the land that has already been built on, so you don't add any more buildings to new land, for example on greenfield sites on the outskirts of cities, and consequently you can house people in the same area of land. 96% of new houses in Bristol since 2015 have been built on brownfield sites such as the Harbourside development. And finally, predict what will happen to air pollution levels in Bristol in the next 20 years. You should have said that air pollution in Bristol will probably decrease because of the rise of public transport such as the Metrobus, which uses the guide rails, cycling, and the reduction in car use because people live close to the centre and so don't need to drive. Time to embed learning. This is really important because it ensures that you never forget these ideas and you really understand them. So make sure you put every effort into these questions. Full sentences using keywords. So number 1, make sure you have both these points. Explain them as I have. 2, a limitation. Any of these. Question 3. Both of these needed. Question 4. Any 2 of these needed. So crime, pollution, house supply, house price rise, urban sprawl, greenfield sites, environmental damage, deforestation, car use. These are the key words. Make sure that you have them. Underline them if you have them. Write them in if you don't. 5. Why is public awareness important? Any two of these points. Make sure you explain them exactly as I have. Correct any mistakes you've got or misunderstandings. Add any points that you've missed. Give yourselves a mark out of the total. If you got all but 2 marks or fewer, fantastic. You've really understood this. If you've lost more than 2 marks, watch the explanation again in a week's time and then attempt these questions from memory again and mark it again. From the lesson, write 2 questions. Answer them from memory and then test yourselves in a week's time to make sure that you really have learned this. Next lesson we're going to be looking at one of the most important ideas in geography, and I'm going to show you how to affect every city, including Bristol, which is inequality. Join me then.